Okay, so it's time for another review, and today our review is going to be a little bit different because I actually don't have a physical copy of this book on me. I also want to say my apologies at the beginning of this video owing to the lighting changes. I've been trying to fix it, it's just not working. Hopefully we can just get through this video and let that go, because this book needs to be reviewed. So, as I said, I don't have a physical copy of this book because I've tried many different ways to acquire a copy of this book and it just doesn't seem to be available anywhere. I've tried local bookstores in Australia, I've tried online places such as Amazon, I even went to eBay. No one seems to have a copy of this book that's available to be sent to me, so we're just going to put a picture of it up there and keep it there for the majority of the review. Today we are going to be reviewing this novelette, Cenote by Sean Horton. Now, how did I read a book when I didn't have the book on me? Well, the answer is pretty much obvious. It's one of two ways. I either read the ebook, which I can't do because my eyes are very sensitive to light, or, option number two, I listened to this book purely as an audiobook, and that's exactly what I did. So, to give you a very brief backstory, a couple of nights ago I was lying in my bed, I couldn't sleep, and so I decided to listen to an audiobook. I've done this in the past, sometimes it was successful, sometimes it was not. So, I remembered hearing about Cenote, and one of the things that drew my attention to this book was the fact that it is a novelette. Now, what is a novelette, you ask? Very good question. Very simple answer. A novelette is a book that is less than 100 pages long. So it's an extremely short book, and as far as the audiobook is concerned, it's going to be a very short audiobook, and that's what I wanted. This audiobook goes for less than an hour. I think it goes for about 45 minutes, but that doesn't mean that it was a bad book. Not at all. So, if you have not seen my reviews before, I split my reviews up into two sections. The first section is a spoiler-free section, where I talk about the book in a spoiler-free way, giving you 3 pros and 3 cons about the book in a spoiler-free way to help you determine if this is the right book for you. Then we go into the spoilery section, where I can either rave or rant till my heart is content in a spoilery way. So let's get right on with this review, reviewing the book Cenote by Sean Horton. So let's start off with a bit of a premise, shall we? This book, there's not a lot that I can say without giving away spoilers because of how short it is, but what I can say is that this book follows 2 characters, Ellie and Arturo. At the beginning of the book, we come to learn that Ellie has travelled to wherever Arturo is. I've forgotten where the book was set, but where the book was set, the actual area that it was set in, isn't the point of the book. But she travels to where he lives, and they end up having some kind of a fling, and then they end up being trapped in a cenote. So basically a cenote is kind of like an underground area that has water in it, and from what I understand, most of the time it is very tough to escape from a cenote, and yeah, it's tough for these characters to escape as well. And I really can't say more than that with the book being so short, otherwise I will be giving away spoilers. So let's jump into my 3 pros and 3 cons. I'll start with my 3 cons first because it's always better to end on a positive note. So, the first spoiler-free con that I'm going to give you for this book to help you determine if this is the right book for you is that this book is a horror. Not only that, it is an extremely dark horror. If that doesn't sound like the right book for you, then maybe don't go about picking up this book. And if you're someone who doesn't want to get scared while reading a book, then I probably would say that this book is not for you because, well, this book was scary. My second con for this book is the beginning of the book. Now, when we're talking about a book that's less than 100 pages long, that is a novelette, the beginning isn't that long either, but it's still a con for me. This book, as I've already said, is a horror, and it starts off, as I've already said with the premise, with Ellie, who has travelled to, I believe it is Mexico, to go on a holiday, and while she's there, she's involved in a fling with a guy whose name is Arturo. And at the beginning of the book, these two characters are, how do we say this in a PC way for BookTube, fooling around in a very graphic way. I don't have a problem with any author writing about any sort of couple that is fooling around in a graphic way, provided that this is an intention that the author has and it fits with the book. I don't feel that this really fit with the book, and it really annoyed me because I started to feel like this book was more of a contemporary / romance rather than a horror. However, if you push through, again, I did not read the physical copy, so I'm just going to guesstimate here and say about the first 3 or 4 pages, then you can get past that section and get onto the horror stuff that occurs. My third and final con for this book is that I wanted more. It's not to say that Cenote doesn't have a very definitive beginning, middle, and end, because it does, and I think that that is a miraculous achievement for a book that is so short. But because of how good it was, I wanted more. Now, I have no idea if Sean Horton plans to write a sequel to this book. I honestly don't know, but I would have liked to have seen more. So that's my third con. It was just a bit too short for me. I wish it was longer. So, diving into my 3 spoiler-free pros for this book, and I'm going to start off by talking about Sean Horton as an author. I don't remember the last time I did a review where my first spoiler-free pro for the book is the author themselves, but Sean Horton has a way with words. For such a short book, the way that Sean Horton writes this book, you can't feel but help like you are standing right next to our main characters as they deal with everything that they deal with. Again, trying to keep this spoiler-free. Almost spoiled some things there. Won't. But yes, you can't help but feel like you are right next to them. Sean Horton has this way of, I was thinking about this earlier, of how I'm going to describe it to you guys in a spoiler-free way, and the best way that I've come up with is that Sean Horton's way of writing is that he is extremely descriptive in an extremely discreet way. So discreet, in fact, that I didn't realize how descriptive he was until I had finished the book, and then went back and critically started thinking about the book and what made me feel like I felt like I was standing next to these characters the whole time. And it was because he is descriptive, but you just don't feel it while you're reading the book. He is a master at writing atmosphere. He is setting the scene and really just having you feel and experience everything. I can't overstate this. All of my senses were involved when listening to this audiobook. I felt like I was seeing what was going on. I was hearing what was going on. I was literally feeling what was going on. To give you an example, as I have already said, a cenote is an underground area that does have water. And there are moments where our characters are in the water. I don't think that's a spoiler, because they're in a cenote, so they're going to be in this water. I literally felt like I was in the water with them, like I could feel the water around me. That's how good of a writer this guy is. And I've read quite a few books this year. I have not experienced an author write a book this well, that was this engaging, that made me literally feel like I was right there with the characters, experiencing everything that my senses could experience alongside them. Massive spoiler-free pro for Sean Horton. My second spoiler-free pro for this novelette is the audiobook narrator. Now, I'm going to premise this by saying that it's no secret that my favourite booktuber is Murphy from booktuber channel Murphy Napier, who just so happens to be the audiobook narrator for this novelette Cenote by Sean Horton. Part of the reason why I was so happy to dive into this book was because I'd never heard Murphy Napier narrate a book before. I know, shock horror. I have known about Murphy longer than I've been running this channel. In fact, she was the inspiration for this channel, but I've never heard her narrate a book before, so I had no idea how good she would be. You guys, I'm not just saying this either, but Murphy has a way with words. She has a way of bringing a book to life in a way that can only be described as feeling like she has been transported into the soul of the character that she is reading about. It was... oh gosh, you guys, it was scary how much I felt like she was reading this book from the perspective of being inside the character, as opposed to someone who is observing the character. I want to give you a very brief example, and I'm going to pull my Dark Vanessa from my bookshelf, and I'm going to read a sentence to you. And I'm going to read this sentence in a way that a standard audiobook narrator might read this sentence. I get ready for work, and the post has been up for 8 hours. While curling my hair, I refresh the page. This is how your standard audiobook narrator is going to read a book. They're literally reading the words that are in front of them, and while it's easy to pick up on what is going on in the book, it feels like the narrator is watching what's happening to the characters from an external perspective. Now, I'm going to read that sentence as though Murphy Napier is reading it, and I'm not as good as Murphy, but I'll give it a go. I get ready for work, and the post has been up for 8 hours. While curling my hair, I refresh the page. You can see the difference. It's an emotional read, but it's like... the best way to describe it is how I was describing it earlier. It's not like you're viewing the characters from an external point. It's like you are literally living inside of that character as you are reading the narration. And Murphy Napier did an amazing job with this. Any sort of emotion that the characters were feeling, it was like Murphy was experiencing it herself as she was reading this book. Anytime something really good happened, it worked. It was like Murphy was feeling the exact same emotion. Anytime something would happen to make a character feel anxious, you felt like Murphy was being affected by the anxiety as well. And this just goes to show how wonderful a performer she is. I really can't say much more other than that, because you really have to experience the audiobook for yourself to know what I mean. But check out the reviews on Goodreads, because I'm not alone on this. Apparently this is a very popular opinion. A lot of people who have reviewed Cenote on Goodreads have commented on how well Murphy Napier did the audio recording. And it's not common on Goodreads for reviewers to mention an audiobook narrator. It's just not something that's really hardly ever done. But the majority of the reviewers for Cenote do mention how amazing Murphy Napier is. So I recommend that you check her out. It was an audiobook experience that I've experienced like never before. And on to my third and final spoiler-free pro, and that is, this is the book that I've been waiting for. Okay, so a tiny bit of backstory. In March of this year, I decided to branch out and read books that I don't typically read in order to expose myself to different types of authors and, most importantly, different types of genres. One of the genres that I decided to expose myself to was the horror genre. I ended up picking up 2 age ranges for the horror genre. One book was a middle grade, so this is a book that has a target audience of children ranged from, say, 7 to 12 years of age, and the other was an adult author, a book that was written for a target audience of people that are aged 18 plus. The middle grade book was written by R.L. Stine, who is a very well-known author of a very well-known middle grade horror series, and the adult book was written by Stephen King, probably the most prolific horror author ever to walk the face of the planet. Neither of these books did what a horror is typically described to do. So if you go into Google and search up the horror genre, you will see that horror, the genre, is defined as a work that is intended to freak you out, disgust you, or make you want to sleep with the light on. Yeah, neither of these books did that for me at all. And I was extremely disappointed by that. I then started talking to a couple of friends, and finally someone said something to me one day that made me feel like I settled with what they'd said. And what this person had said to me was, well, Mr. Francy, you have to understand that there's always going to be a difference between watching a horror film versus reading a horror book. When it comes to reading a horror book, you are limited. You have limitations, and those limitations are what you can imagine when you're reading that book. Where with a horror film, it's expect the unexpected, and anytime that you don't expect the unexpected, you're going to freak out. Now, I accepted this, and I shouldn't have, but I did. And I thought, look, maybe I can just try some more horrors, and maybe I'll just read some that are better than others, but none of them are going to freak me out. I just accept this. No. No, I am here to tell you that if you want to read a book that makes you want to turn the light on when you're in bed, and that freaks you out to the point that you are convinced you are going to have a nightmare, read Cenote by Sean Horton. As I said, I was reading this book when I was in bed, and by the time I got to the end of that book, I was convinced I was going to have a nightmare about a particular scene that occurred in this book. That's how good it was. This book does what a horror is meant to do, and that is my third spoiler-free pro. It does what you expect. It freaks you out. It disgusts you. It scares you to the point that you need to turn the light on because you are so freaked out. It was so well done, and I highly recommend this book. If you can get a copy of the physical version, wonderful. If you can't, go on to Audible and listen to Murphy Napier's narration of this book because it is amazing. But trust me, if you want a book that's going to freak you out, pick Cenote by Sean Horton. Let's jump over to my spoiler section now. So if you haven't read this book, I recommend go and listen to the audiobook and then come back. If you have, stick with me. We're going over to the spoiler section right now. Okay, spoiler section time. Oh, where do I begin with Cenote? Okay, obviously the beginning did really, disappoint me because as I was saying in the spoiler-free section, I didn't like that Sean Horton had set us up with these two people who were having a fling, and it really just seemed more like a contemporary or a romance than a horror. But from the moment that Ellie and Arturo, I keep forgetting his name, fall into the cenote, oh my god, this is the best book ever. I'm sorry, Miss Bourne, don't listen. It is so good. Okay, so one thing that I didn't like post our characters falling into the cenote was the whole damsel in distress scene. Sean Horton makes it very obvious from the get-go that Ellie is not a character who is mentally strong or physically strong enough to take care of herself, and that she needs to rely on a man to do all the work. This really annoyed me. I am someone who is all about equality, and because of that, I love one of my favorite types of tropes in books is mentally strong female protagonists. And so to have this damsel in distress woman who didn't really seem to be able to do anything without the guy helping her really did annoy me. So the guy decides, after they've tried to find a way out of the cenote and find that there is no way, decides that he is going to swim off, and hopefully there will be enough air pockets for him to survive to find a way to a cave so that they can get out. He leaves our damsel in distress behind and says, I can do this because I can breathe underwater for a minute. Can you? Yeah, that was... I had issues with that. But anyway, so Arturo takes a swim and finds an air pocket and then finds another cenote. And he's trying to work out how to get out of this second cenote. While he's there, he's dealing with what seems like a pestery eel. An eel that's just pestering him. This kind of annoyed me too, because I thought if this is the horror element, then it's really boring me. Because even the way that Arturo was responding to the eel was more like, why can't you just go away and leave me alone? Like, I'm trying to do something here and you're just really annoying me. So, yeah, I didn't appreciate that. But then, dun dun dun, the villain of this book appeared. And oh my god, I don't think I'm ever going to view this creature the same way ever again. So Arturo is in this second cenote, and the next thing he knows, this massive octopus comes up from out of nowhere, and we get a very graphically detailed scene where, as I said, like, all of the senses are invoked during this experience. You feel like you're literally there with him experiencing what he's experiencing. That's what makes it so terrifying, but also when you're critically analysing this book and trying to review it, what makes it so good, you're there, and for me, I felt like I was literally with him as this octopus had its tentacles wrapped around his body and was sucking him in, and then eventually biting him and killing him. I did not think I would come into 2020 and say I found a horror that I absolutely loved, because horrors are really dark, but oh my god, yes, yes, yes. After reading so many books that have what seem to be really dark moments, that whether it ends because of a plot convenience or whether it ends because our character or characters find a way to get out of the trouble they're in, there always seems to be a way out of the darkness, but not this time. Arturo is strangled by this octopus. He is literally suckered in, and then he is devoured by this octopus. And it was, Sean Horton and Murphy Napier, dynamic duo. The way this is described, I was shaking listening to this book, but it was so good. Then we go back to Ellie, the damsel in distress, who is wondering where Arturo is and why he is taking so long. And I think eventually an hour passes and she eventually gives up on him, thinking, well, he would have been back by now, which I think is kind of funny, because what if it took longer than an hour for him to find his way out? But she's already thinking, it's been an hour, he's dead, so I have to go and do this myself. Anyway, but I did appreciate that finally she's stopping being this damsel in distress, and she's now going to try and find her own way out of this cenote. So there is a log that just so happens to be on the water, so she moves the log over to herself and uses it to spring herself up onto a very tiny ledge that's on the wall of the cenote to try and, I guess, rock climb her way up the wall. Let's now move on to plot convenience number 2, which we did not know till this point. Apparently she's had a lot of rock climbing experience, so this shouldn't be too difficult to do. By this point of the story, I was thinking, you know what? This is a solid 3-star read. I I'm not really a fan of Sean Horton putting in a plot convenience here that she's a rock climber, but I can already see what's going to happen. She's going to get out of the cenote, and she will become a better woman for what she's gone through, for the experience that she's gone through, right? So she gets onto that first ledge, and it's starting to crumble, but she makes it there, and then she moves on to the next stepping point up the wall, and she notices that there are some roots that are dangling down from the ceiling, and if she just makes it up to the lowest hanging root, then she'll be able to grab that root. Hopefully it will be strong enough to hold her, and she can climb her way up the root and out through the top of the cenote. So she does. She makes her way to that bottom of that root and clings onto it. And then she sees an eye as big as a dinner plate. And all at once, she comes to discover that the root is not a root at all. In fact, it is one of the tentacles of the octopus. Oh my god. And so obviously she is terrified, and she just wants to escape, but her only option really would be to drop from the octopus back into the water, and then she's out of luck. There's no other way to get back up there because the footholds that she had have all crumbled by now, so there's no other way up, and she doesn't know what to do. And while she's taking all this time to try and work out what to do, her indecision becomes her downfall as the octopus consumes her and eats her and kills her. And the final line in the book is something like, as she took her last breath, she couldn't believe this happened, or something like that, and then her world turned to darkness. The end. Yes. Thank you, Sean Horton. Finally, there is a horror book that ends with a horror. Oh my gosh. Because I've read horror books that have turned out okay. And even if our characters might be a little worse for the wear, they've still made it out alive. And no one survived this scene except for our villain, Mr. Octopus. This was just incredible. And I don't know if I would have appreciated this book as much if I had read it in March. But having gone through the struggles I went through in March, and then getting to the point where I had just given up on any sort of horror book scaring me, and then coming across this little novelette called Cenote by Sean Horton, I am just blown away and ever so thankful that I finally got a dark horror story with all the darkness that I needed. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. Now, I said earlier that I will never look at a certain creature the same way again, and yep, you guessed it, I will never look at an octopus the same way again. The only time I've ever seen an octopus that is a villain is from Disney's The Little Mermaid with Ursula, and she's not really what you would call an octopus. She's kind of more like a half mermaid, half octopus. Yeah, anyway, so I finished this book, and I was laying in my bed, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have a nightmare. Like, seriously, I'm gonna have a nightmare that an octopus is gonna kill me, and it's gonna scar me for life. And I didn't, and I'm really happy that I didn't. But the following night, last night, I actually ended up looking up a documentary on octopuses. Very interesting fact. A lot of people think that the plural of octopus is octopi. It's actually not. It's octopuses. That's something I worked out too. So yeah, I ended up looking up a documentary on octopuses, and it was really interesting, but I do have to say that for the first 10 minutes I was freaking out watching this thing. It's definitely something to listen to a story and see what you see in your mind versus seeing it on the screen. I will relent to that. But by the time I got to the end of the documentary, I'd definitely been desensitized to octopuses because they were presented in a way that was more, oh, look at this creature, rather than look at how terrible and terrifying this creature is. But yeah, so what can I say other than this book, I mean, I'm going to call it. This book is going to make my favorites of the year list at the end of the year. I really don't see how it won't make that top 10 list at all. And right now it's, again, Mistborn, don't listen, but it's on par with Mistborn. And I never thought I would say that there is a book that's on par with Mistborn, The Final Empire. But this one is, because it delivered everything I wanted it to deliver. I still can't believe that for such a short book, like a 45-minute audiobook, like that should show you it's a very short, little, teeny tiny little novelette, that it could pack such a punch. And I'm definitely inspired to not only read more horror, but I'm definitely inspired to see if there are any other works out there by Sean Horton. And if there are, I definitely want to pick them up, going in knowing that he's more than likely going to scare me again. But it was just an amazing read. So I highly recommend you pick this book up if you're looking for a horror that is going to deliver. Because this one most definitely did. I'm going to make a massive call here. Probably a controversial one, but I'm going to make the call anyway. Step aside, Stephen King. There is a new king on the horror scene, and his name is Sean Horton. I'm going to leave it there and let you guys go. Peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you so much for bearing with me with the lighting issue. I'm so sorry. As I said at the start of this video, I did try to fix it, but it's still doing it now. It's going in and out and in and out, and I honestly don't know why. I'm dealing with unnatural light, so it doesn't make any sense. But thank you for sticking with me. I do appreciate it. And go and check this book out. Letting you guys go. Peace, blessings, and so much love, and happy reading. Mwah. Bye, guys.